Hey there, my name's Kiri and I'm a flower farmer here in Western Washington in Zone 8A. A couple weeks ago I posted a video on how to set up a planting plan for your flower farm, so if you haven't checked that video out, go ahead and check that out first. I think that'll be a little bit helpful when you're looking at this video, which is all about how to succession plant. So succession planting for flower farming can be a little bit tricky because there's a lot of moving parts. So unlike vegetable farming, for example, where most of those crops are annuals and you can pretty much just succession sow those on a set schedule, flower farming is a little bit different because you've got a mix of a lot of different types of plants if you're growing, a bunch of different things. So an example of that, you've got your annual plants like sunflowers that you probably should succession sow on a weekly basis, but then you also mix in, hardy annuals that might be fall sown, perennials that really bloom at a certain time and they come back every year and bloom at that one time. Then you've got bulbs and corms that bloom on a schedule as well. There's also woodies too, so you've got your bushes out there that you might be cutting on certain times of the year. So there's a lot of moving parts and it can be really tricky to figure out when you're going to have blooms and when you need to plant things so that you can have blooms when you need them. Before we jump into this video, I just want to give you some information that should be really helpful in figuring out how many successions that you actually need to do. So first, we need to consider the production level of the flowers. So one and done flowers are going to give you one bloom per plant, and you need to plant those very frequently. That would be like most pro-cut sunflowers. You should probably plant those every 1 to 2 weeks. Medium producers, you should plant about every 3 to 4 weeks. I've found most of these to be pretty productive, and I only do a succession about once a month. And then cut and come again flowers, it is helpful to refresh the batch throughout the growing season because the initial succession can kind of get tired as the season goes on. So I'll succession plant that every month or two. The other thing to consider is the days to maturity. Certain plants are going to take longer to go from seed to flower, and that means that you can do only a few successions or maybe even one succession of those through the season. Looking at you, status. And then other plants are going to come to maturity very quickly, like sunflowers, so you can keep succession sowing those the entire season. The final thing that we should consider is whether or not the plant is day length or temperature sensitive. So certain plants will only bloom when there is so much daylight in a day, and you're not going to change that. So you're not going to get blooms any faster than when there's X amount of light in the day. So consider that, and also consider temperature sensitivity. So for example, ranunculus, you're not going to get that to flower when it starts to get hot, and that's just a fact. There are quite a few different methods to succession plant, but I'm going to focus on 2 in this video. The first one is very simple. Select one variety of plant and plant it many times throughout your growing season. So in this example, we're looking at pro-cut sunflowers. They give us 1 stem per plant, so we can plant those every week and then get a harvest every week. And you would plant this up through a specific date, which is based on your first frost date. So look at your first frost date and then count back about 60 days, and that's when you should do your last succession. You can go a week or 2 after that if you'd like to make sure that if you do have a late frost, you still have blooms, but that's about the rule of thumb. The second method is to plant multiple varieties that have different days to maturity to change your harvest window. So you'll see here I've chosen all sunflower varieties, Pro-Cut, Double Quick, and Buttercream. And we're still getting a harvest window from July 2nd through July 16th. And actually, you'll see that Buttercream is giving us a harvest from June 25th through July 16th. And that's because Buttercream is a branching variety. So it's kind of in a way like a medium producer, and it's going to give us blooms over a longer period of time. So this is another way to extend your harvest. Let's talk about my plan just to kind of put this in context. So I learned a couple lessons from this last year. Plants that need to be started indoors are going to require grow light space. They're also going to require a space to harden off. And then you need to have planting space in your plan outside somewhere in the dirt to plant them, right? But then when you're doing successions, you need enough space at each of those stages to hold the successions. So when you're starting seeds indoors, that's going to take about 4 to 6 weeks on average for the seedlings to go from germinating to being big enough to go into your hardening off space. They're going to spend about a week or two there, and then you can plant them out. But in the meantime, you're also going to have your next succession that you'll probably have to do within that 4 to 6 week window, and then you're going to have other plants that are hardening off in your hardening off area. So you're actually going to have a lot of plants in the same area. As I'm sure you're tired of hearing at this point, I don't have a lot of grow light space inside, and I also am pretty limited outside as well. I found that I can really minimize my amount of succession planting, which is great. So I'm focusing in on hardy annuals and cut and come again flowers. I'm also incorporating a lot of bulbs and perennials to reduce the amount of succession planting that I have to do as well. So by incorporating hardy annuals, I get a fall sowing. So I'm sowing seeds in August, July, planting those out in the fall, letting them hang out over winter time, and then I'm also doing a second succession in January-ish for planting out in about March. Then that frees up my grow light space inside so that I can start basil and some of those tender plants that do need to be started inside, give them as much growing space under the lights as possible. And then by that point, I can start seeds in the greenhouse because it won't be super cold, and then I'll have more space to do grow light successions and greenhouse successions of tender annuals if I need to do that. And then we move into the point of the year that we can direct sow tender annuals outside, so I don't even have to worry about grow space. Focusing in on cut and come again flowers, so I only have to do 1 or 2 successions of those. My strategy for that is very informal. Basically what I do is I take a look at my patch. If I have any holes, so seeds that didn't germinate, especially with direct sown, you'll probably have that, I'll just do my second succession as a filling in of those holes. That way I can kind of get a second succession in the same amount of space. And then I have incorporated more perennials, so that is planted one time and then they come back for years and years. Long story short, I don't have a very formalized succession planting plan because I'm trying to not do a whole bunch of that. I hope you found this information helpful, and I hope you have a great year gardening this next year. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.